So my name's John. I am working on a PhD that is developing an online dignity therapy program. So what we're doing pretty much is helping healthy older adults tell their life stories. And the end product is a written sort of transcript of our conversation that they're free to pass on to their loved ones that sort of documents their legacy and inscribes it for future generations.
What have you found out so far from the process?
A fair bit. So to give a bit of background on dignity therapy, it was originally designed for people with terminal illness. We're applying that in a different population, a healthy older adult sample, and seeing whether it's feasible to conduct online, because the original program was conducted face-to-face. And dignity therapy, just a brief overview, it sort of runs through a series of 10 questions where it asks participants to sort of reminisce on their life and answer questions such as, when have you felt most alive? What are some life lessons that you want to impart on the next generation? So although that was originally designed for people with terminal illnesses, we're all going to die one day. So I think those questions sort of have utility for people of all life stages. And what we've found sort of early stages at the moment, we're still writing up the manuscripts, but it's quite promising in that healthy older adults seem to have really taken to it and use it as an opportunity to, as I said before, inscribe their legacy. So that's pretty much what we've found so far.
What would you say some of the biggest benefits are of leaving a legacy?
I guess the power of telling your own story is hard to underestimate. So I guess just having the opportunity to really paint your own narrative as you would like it to be heard and remembered. So what we've found is that participants in our study have really used it as an opportunity to kind of integrate their whole events in their lives, the good and the bad. And dignity therapy can provide sort of an opportunity for participants to make sense of and reconcile those two things, the good and the bad, and look at it as an integrated whole, and to think back and think, my life hasn't been all, sunshine and rainbows, but the negative things that have happened to me have made me who I am, and I wouldn't be the person I am without those. So it's kind of like, creating that cohesive whole rather than looking at yourself in little fragments, if that makes sense,
What kind of feedback have you received so far from people that have taken part in the process?
So in terms of feedback, before we began, I was a bit apprehensive about conducting the program online. As I said before, the original dignity therapy was conducted face-to-face, and it's quite a brief intervention in that it's typically between 2 and 5 sessions, about an hour each. So, these are strangers that I'm meeting, and I'm somewhat expecting them to divulge, these deep, dark secrets that they've got. And I thought it might be challenging for older adults to open up to me quite quickly, particularly with that online format. Like, it's a bit of a different rapport building process than what would be face-to-face. Luckily, I've been quite astonished at how, and humbled at how open the participants have been to, just chatting. And, once we get going, it really does feel like there isn't much lost in terms of that empathy and warmth and connection between myself and participants. And that's been backed up by their reports. Part of my study is, asking them, how did you find the online format? And, all of them have said the benefits far outweigh the minor negatives. And there could be a few reasons for that. They've spoken about, the convenience, obviously not having to get up and drive in traffic or get public transport. And I guess being in the comfort of your own home, you're in your own couch, you've got your own mug with whatever drink you want. Perhaps that engenders a greater form of comfort that helps engender, opening up and being vulnerable. And I'm just so humbled is probably the number one feeling that I've had from all of this, that these people have, opened up their lives to a relative stranger and me. And I'm in such a privileged position to be able to hear that and you know, to learn so much from them. Like it's I have to pinch myself that this is my job, that I get to, you know, just extract wisdom from these healthy older adults, and it's crazy to think that. Like, yeah, it's been great.
How did leaving a digital legacy improve mental health outcomes?
It's early days. I need to stress that in that I ran 2 studies. The first was a qualitative study, which we've finished the manuscript for, and the second was a larger scale quantitative study, which we're still looking through the data. So with that heavy caveat applied, I can more comment on the qualitative stuff because we have looked at that extensively. And yeah, a few themes sort of popped up. So what we did, we ran the program, and then after each session, at the end of the entire program, we ran interviews with the participants, and we asked them, how did you benefit from the program? And a few themes popped up from those interviews. Firstly, I think it all sort of comes under the umbrella of that sort of idea of that integrated narrative and strengthened view of self. The utility of sort of dredging up the past, which different people have different opinions on. Some people think, just leave it there, particularly the negative stuff. But what we found was that there was huge utility in dredging up even the negative stuff to make sense of it, and so that the individuals could, see themselves in light of everything in whole, rather than, as I said before, in fragments and little bits. And then on top of that, there was a lot of work, or participants mentioned quite a bit, feeling a heightened sense of acceptance and self-compassion for their past selves or their current selves. That when they were given the opportunity to recount what had happened to them, including trauma that had been inflicted upon them, the process of doing that and speaking to someone else almost felt like they were speaking about someone else, in that being a past version of themselves. And self-compassion can be so hard because we get so stuck in our ruts, and we apply a double standard where we'll be so harsh on ourselves, but we would never direct the kind of self-critical voice that we give to ourselves to a friend. And what I think happened in dignity therapy was that by talking about a younger self, you kind of were talking about your past self like it was a different person, and that seemed to engender a heightened sense of self-compassion, that you could talk about all this stuff and this trauma that had happened to you with a sense of, I'm sorry that happened, and almost figuratively give your younger self a hug and tell them that you're sorry for them, almost splitting the self into two somewhat. So that was something that was really powerful to observe, and that a few participants reported on. Just that integrated view of self and that heightened sense of self-compassion and acceptance, I think, were two major things.
That's fascinating. What were some of the biggest challenges you found in the qualitative study?
Challenges.
You can say.
Yeah, it all went so smoothly, to be honest. There were very minor issues with, say, because it is all online, say internet disconnection, or older adults. I think there's a stereotype that they're not so good with tech sometimes. My findings didn't really support that. There were minor issues in terms of like meshing, say, Microsoft and Apple programs together, but very quickly resolved. So it might sound like a bit of a cop-out, but beyond those minor technological issues, really no major challenges. It was very smooth sailing. Potentially one, not so much a challenge, but maybe a thought on who might benefit more or less from this. In the 5 participants I had, one of the participants was more closed off, perhaps. And I mentioned before, the majority of participants were really open, and I was so humbled by their vulnerability. But there were a select few of the 25 in total that were a bit more closed off, and they tended to more likely be male. I don't want to make sweeping generalizations here, but there is that stigma applied to, males not being perhaps feeling as open to discussing their emotions, particularly with a relative stranger and myself. So that was, I guess, probably the biggest challenge. Those participants still completed the program and were satisfied, but I suspect that they perhaps didn't reap the full benefits, as much as another individual that was more open to being vulnerable. And no, yeah, like, it's totally understandable that they would be that way. I understand that, but just a minor comment, I guess.
How do you think society would change and storytelling as a whole?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it comes back to compassion. We're a lot more likely to give compassion to others when we understand their story, I suspect, and I strongly suspect. It's very easy, particularly in the new age, to cast judgment on someone quite quickly and to assume that you know their story from a few data points. If things like this were more widespread and people did take some time to reflect on, who am I, why am I the way that I am, what is my story, and share that story with others, I think the process of doing it yourself and realizing I've made mistakes in the past, but that doesn't define who I am, can help afford some self-compassion and hopefully some compassion towards others as well, in that we have more of a nuanced view of seeing the world and ourselves and other people. Because at the end of the day, we all screw up. No one's perfect. We like to see the world in this black and white lens, but there's a whole lot of grey there. And by telling our stories and integrating the story as one whole, I think that encourages us to see the grey, both in ourselves and in others. I hope.
What have you personally learned from your participants?
What have I learned from participants? A whole lot. Foremost, I come back to the first participant I ever had, actually, and it is a lady that works in palliative care and had some experience with dignity therapy, or at least knew what it was. So I asked her for some advice. Amazing woman, really lovely. And it was the advice she gave me was so simple. It was just shut up and listen. It's so obvious. It's a bit cliched, but goodness, like, although I heard it at the time, I just keep coming back to it and realizing the truth of it. And not only as a psychologist, but as a friend, as a brother, as a partner, as anything in life, just shut up and listen. We're so hungry to talk about ourselves a lot of the time. And a lot of, I guess, society is, or not society, I guess, a lot of relationship is hinged upon, I guess, you having a conversation with someone and waiting for your turn to speak, I think. And we're all guilty of it. But the simplicity of shut up and listen and helping other people feel heard by doing that and really, really tuning in on what they're saying. As I said, not only as a psychologist, but in all parts of life, I think is super valuable. And having the opportunity that I've had in my PhD to listen to older adults that have such a wealth of knowledge has instilled that in me even more than it was at the start. It's quite simple, but shut up and listen. Yeah.
What lessons would you pass on to others considering interviewing their parents or grandparents or someone they care about?
Yeah, I think it really just comes down to shutting up and listening, fundamentally, and to get really, I guess it would be somewhat easier if you were to interview a family member, to be more focused on being interested in the other person rather than, it's my turn to share. I want to be interesting. Really just focus on just question after question, try and make them as open as possible and almost adopt a bit of a scientific approach, or like perhaps a documentary maker where you're just trying to extract more and more. And once it might sound a bit stringent and structured when I put it like that, but I think once you get into that mode of, talking about someone and you see someone light up and they get a bit passionate, I think it will just flow quite naturally. So shut up and listen, ask a lot of questions, enjoy it. I think if you do those two things, not only is the recipient more likely to open up and enjoy it, I think you will be too, when you lose that focus on, I need to share something about me. Yeah.
What is your research trying to achieve?
What we're trying to achieve is, I guess in the broader scheme, it helped to give a bit of a background as to what the field of clinical psychology has been shaped by. And that is, most of it is focused, the high majority of it is focused on that disease model, where you're treating people with diagnosable mental illnesses and trying to ameliorate their suffering, really. And while more and more people are experiencing diagnosable mental illnesses, the majority of us don't have one currently. So I think what that model misses out on is the majority of the population. And so much of research is focused on getting tools developing tools that help people get from, say, a -5 in mood to a 0 in mood. Whereas, so much so much of us are sort of languishing in that middle ground, particularly nowadays, and as a result of COVID. I think, anecdotally anyway, I'm experiencing or hearing a lot about people that feel a sense of numbness, perhaps, where they're not an 8 out of 10, but they're also not a -5 out of 10. They're somewhere in the middle there. And I think we need more tools for those people that take you from a 0 to a 5. I think there's a huge opportunity there for people to tell their story, and hopefully in doing so helps lift their mood a little bit. So what dignity therapy is focused on, originally it was focused on people with terminal illnesses, and it's been applied in other settings of people with cancer, dementia, people in nursing homes. But what we're doing is we're saying, okay, can we apply this to a healthy older adult sample living in the community? And it's such an untapped pool of people that might be suffering. They might not be suffering as much as other people say, but that doesn't mean that we can't improve their lives. And I think moving towards more of a model where we try and improve everyone's life will have huge ramifications on not only the individual, but society, that we can get to a point where we're not just going through the motions, but we're actually flourishing and really aiming to enhance our well-being rather than just ameliorate our suffering. So yeah, that's largely what we're trying to achieve here.
How easy was the process of actually interviewing someone about their life?
Again, I don't want to pass it off as being super easy. It was definitely aided by the fact that dignity therapy provides you that framework of 10 questions. And those 10 questions are, for example, what's your life story? When did you feel most alive? What lessons do you want to pass on to the next generation? So that sort of created a bit of a scaffolding for the conversation. That being said, I did try and make it as much of a natural conversation as possible. So we did go off script more often than not. But having that basis and having the individuals read those 10 questions, and I recommend that they prepare some dot point answers just to think about what they might want to share, definitely helped. And then once they get talking and sharing, there's just, my role then is just to act as a mirror and just to ask follow-up question after follow-up question. And once that got started, really, once the ball got rolling, it was pretty seamless. Like once you properly listen to someone, I feel that it's such a rare thing to be listened to and to be the total focus of a conversation, that when people are afforded that opportunity, they take it and they run with it. And it's a pleasure for me to witness that I can just sit back and take it all in.
What kind of feedback did you receive from the participants?
Yeah, so we got all sorts of feedback. A few do stick out in my mind. One of my participants spoke about, and she lived quite a troubled life and had experienced some significant traumas in her life. And she spoke about how dignity therapy afforded her the opportunity to look at her life as an integrated whole and to look at those sufferings that she had inflicted upon her in the past. And she described them as mulch. And she spoke about how, the mulch and the sufferings in your life are the really shitty things that you wouldn't want to repeat again, but the process of telling your story allows you to make sense of those sufferings in light of the person that you are today. And whether it's through dignity therapy or any other medium or mode, I think that's a hugely beneficial thing for us to do. We all suffer in life, some more than others, but if we can make sense of it and really look back on it and see it as mulch, that it helped make us who we are today, and we wouldn't be us without it, and it helped fertilize us and helped us grow. I really like that use of metaphor in terms of, those sufferings helping us be who we are today. Another quote, say, from another participant, she spoke about how the importance of having a willing listener on the other side. She said she could have gone through the 10 dignity therapy questions by herself, and she would have gained some benefit from that, just writing out some answers and thinking about that. But when you're conversing with someone, she spoke about how that was almost like playing tennis with someone. Whereas if you just writing out how you feel and you're answering those questions by yourself, it's more like you're practicing against a wall perhaps, or you're serving by yourself. There isn't that feedback. There isn't that potential for you to get better in tennis, but also in terms of make light of your experiences with a willing listener in dignity therapy. So that sort of dance of conversation, if you like, that I think it engenders more, I hope it does anyway, self-reflection perhaps, more so than just writing it out or just journaling or just audio recording to yourself. You've got that willing listener on the other side saying, what about this? What about that? And that hopefully can get you to think about stuff that perhaps you wouldn't have been led to without that listener. So that metaphor of a tennis game, I really like.
How do you see a platform like the archive helping others through story capture?
Sure. I think it's really the power of narrative and life stories that is not only beneficial for the individual inscribing their own legacy and talking about their own lives, but you look at autobiographies and largely they're of famous people, which is great, and a lot of the time they've experienced amazing things that are out of the scope of ordinary life. But there's so much potential for us to learn off ordinary, everyday folk, I guess. So what I see the archive as being is being a tool or an avenue for people to achieve that. To, if they're experiencing something, that they can, search through the archive and witness or read over how other people have dealt with similar things. And although amazing stories of celebrities, conquering huge feats are very entertaining, they might not be as relevant to the everyday person. So what the archive does is it allows you firstly to, tell your story and put it in the public archive, but also it allows recipients to read that and hopefully benefit from your wisdom, because there's so much collective wisdom there that's largely going untapped at the moment.
Why should people tell their story?
I think that people should tell their story because so often I hear from my participants who are all over 60 now, and most of their parents aren't around anymore, and they speak about, I wish I knew this about my parents. I wish my parents had participated in something like this. What that goes to show you is that people do need to be proactive in doing this while they can. Because at the end of the day, our stories is all we've got. So much of our identity is pinned up in stories, and I can read through a timeline of my ancestors' life. It doesn't really tell me much. If I can get into the nitty gritty and the nuance and the depth of their actual story and the essence of who they were, that's going to last a hell of a lot longer than knowing a few data points. It's life's in the detail, and that's where someone's true identity is. And there's so much potential for us to tell our stories in whatever medium we like, and tailoring that to each individual. And in doing so, I think it helps not only in the present moment, a heightened sense of self and a strengthened view of your own identity, but obviously after you die, your future relatives are really going to appreciate it, and you can really paint that sense of family identity and the thread connecting the different generations, and make sense of that within someone's life, but also between generations. So I think there's huge potential there.